to get chosen.
So we're on live. We're going to
Yes.
record, and we've had a technical glitch, which Ashley has probably already alerted everyone on LinkedIn to. But we've decided to have the conversation and put it up so people can listen anyway. So Ashley, you might like to keep time for us. We'll do a 30-minute chit chat here. Thank you. So I'm Wendy-Ann. I'm co-founder of the Coaching Ethics Forum, and these LinkedIn Lives are new to us this year. So everything about them is really new, and we're learning. Though in this instance, I don't believe it's our fault. So we'll figure it out for next time. So today we're going to be talking about, we're talking with Francine Campone, who authored a chapter in the Ethical Coach's Handbook called Choose Me, a title which I actually think is really cool and apt for the whole content of the chapter. So we're going to delve into the chapter a little bit, some of the content, but talk about some of the issues around the promotion and marketing of coaching and how coaches do that. So Francine, would you like to tell us a little about yourself first, please?
Yes, thank you. Well, I'm Francine Campone, obviously, and living in Denver, Colorado. Have been coaching for, I've lost track of how many years. I'm a coaching supervisor and mentor and assessor, and a person with great curiosity about everything. And hence, when I was invited to write the chapter about ethics and coaching promotion, had a wonderful time doing a deep dive into the philosophy of ethics, the psychology of ethics, and just really exploring and thinking about, how do we present ourselves and how do we manage that push and pull between getting what we want and doing what's right.
Yeah, when coaching is relational, yeah?
Coaching is entirely relational. And who we say is going to show up better be the one that shows up. Otherwise, the relationship is already on shaky ground. Right? There's this whole idea in the psychology of social media, especially, about the presented self. Who am I presenting, and who is being constructed by the viewer or the potential client based on what I'm presenting and what I'm omitting, because they don't know what I'm omitting. So it's an important piece to recognize that when we promote, essentially we're saying, this is who I am, and this is who you're going to meet. And we set up expectations. We set up the psychological contract from the get-go before we ever meet anybody.
I think it's interesting that when we're talking about promotion of the self for our work professionally, and that some people might think it's about putting content up on social media, and some people, but then there's, the different kinds of content.
Mm-hmm.
Is it about saying, hey, look, I've got this great program, or I've got this great product, or I do this great thing? There's lots of great stuff going on there.
Yeah.
It's more than showing up with just all these products and services.
Yeah. I think there are all the aspects. It's interesting when we compare, for example, the kind of profile that a coach might put in a professional directory. It's pretty much giving them the facts, right? Here's my background, here's my education, here's who I've worked with. Maybe there's a case study. But essentially, we're trusting this person to form their own opinion. Right? There's not a lot of emotional appeal. When we look at some websites, when we look at some social media, it is clearly designed to sway. Right? I think that there's the difference between promotion, right? Okay, here's the information, and marketing. Here's what I'm selling.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the difference between who I am and what I'm selling.
So how do you meld the two? And what are the problems that might come about in trying to do that? Because
Well,
yeah,
yeah.
go,
No,
continue.
no, no. As you, sorry.
I mean, it just made me think about, because I do both
Yeah.
personally. I do a lot of the forum stuff saying,
Mhm,
hey, everyone, look at the forum and please come and join us because I think
mhm,
this topic's really important. But then on my own profile, I'll tell stories about myself and ask questions in relation to that. I rarely post other people's content in terms of other people's articles or whatever, unless they've written in one of my books. Then
mhm,
I'd love to share their work in that way.
mhm.
Um, so I find for me personally, there's two different ways of being for when things are going in the forum content or even the journal content for that matter,
Mhm.
and how I show up on my own professional site. There's a lot more of me, the human, in my professional site. I don't think that's a problem, but we got any comments to say around that?
I don't think they're two distinct things. I think you are consistently you, right? That the profession, whatever you're sharing professionally, um, and then what you're sharing in the forum revealed something about the fact that you are collaborative, that you are sharing the work of others suggests, okay, Wendy-Ann is a person who supports, oh, sorry, I don't know why this phone keeps, yeah, you're a person who supports other people, that you see a bigger picture where there's an opportunity for everyone and you want to promote that. So it says the fact that you do that says something about who you are and how you see the world and how you see yourself in the bigger context of colleagues, potential clients. And what you're offering is information that's useful to others. So this hypothetical client out there can think, oh, that woman posts some really interesting, juicy stuff. And I've read that blog and I actually used it, you know?
Yeah, and that would be great if they did, although I don't write too many blogs, to be honest.
Well,
But I do share some
yeah,
stories of mine in context.
yeah.
I mean, I guess I'm kind of saying my own story there, but also wanting to think about other things that I see of other people. And I just go, wow, I see that, but that's not who I speak to when I talk to you. There's like a different person that shows up. And I'm just wondering, what do you think of the ethical implications around that in relation to coaching and, the promoting of self?
We're all multidimensional, right? And in different contexts, some dimensions are more forward than others. And when I'm writing, for example, I I have this whole academic geek side. I own that. Sometimes colleagues say, "Speak English, Francine," and but that whole side of myself, that whole the part of me that wears some strange hat and wears big glasses, is appropriate for that context.
Mm.
Now, when I'm talking with colleagues informally in this conversation, right, I'm trying to not bring forward my inner geek, but just, here's this kind of quirky person who thinks about these things in a particular way. So I think that what you do and what I do, and I think what many coaches do, is we recognize our multidimensionality, our multifacetedness, and we bring forward different facets in different places at different times. The, the, the difficulty comes in with coaches who only show their splendid side and their sales pitch, right? They're not offering anything of value. They're not offering any place that in themselves that a potential client can relate to. Like, oh yeah, I have that geeky side too. Gee, it's nice to know. You know. So I don't see it as an either or, but if we only cut off one part of ourselves and say, this is who I am, we're withholding other aspects that may or may not be a good fit or connection.
So we're talking about selves, a lot of the self here, and we've put both of ourselves out here in this conversation, so why not? And in the chapter, you wrote about the want self and the should self.
Yes. Yeah.
And that was curious. It's the first time I had read about that information. And I just went, yeah, I quite like the temperamental, hot-tempered a little bit. I want this self of maybe my 6-month-old granddaughter when she turns 2. So
Yeah.
you tell us more about those selves and
Mm.
how that influences how we show up
Yeah.
in that space, and maybe some of the problems that might arise from it.
That concept, and I found that one really intriguing, actually does come from the field of moral psychology. Who knew that there was such a thing as moral psychology? And it's a natural state of being human, right? We want to take care of ourselves, our needs, our families, and so forth. At the same time, there are times when we have to really sit down and think, is it ethical for me, for example, to take a job with this client? I want the money. I want to add to my client roster. At the same time, I'm recognizing there's a disconnect, and I don't know that I have the qualifications or the essential goods to serve this person properly. So we really need, it's like those cartoons where there's a little devil on one side and an angel on the other. We need to let them have a conversation about what's the ethical thing to do here, and how does my want side and my do the right thing side, how do they negotiate situation by situation?
Yeah, because my want side wants to earn one hell of a lot of money. And to do that, I'm going to promise people a transformative experience.
That's right.
Their life and themselves are going to be transformed, and their business is going to increase by exponentially by, I don't know, some ridiculous amount.
Yes, that's right.
There are problems around the language that we use and the things we promise. Yeah.
That's right. And so I think that's a good example of where it tends to show up, right? That we're using emotional language, right? We're making fantastic promises, which just say to the client, oh, I'm going to talk to your want self. I'm going to give you everything you want, right? And we forget that there's this other piece about what can I legitimately offer the client? And ultimately, what happens in the coaching engagement is the client's responsibility. So when we make fantastic promises, we are essentially manipulating and dismissing the client's role and responsibility and autonomy and dignity in the process. And
In
that's
trying to fulfill our want self, or
that's right.
pulling
Right.
it out of balance.
That's right. But you know, the autonomy and dignity of others is a core principle of ethical behavior.
Mm-hmm.
And when we neglect to take that into consideration, we are being unethical in service to serving our want selves.
That has me think about other types of promises or statements that we make about ourselves. I mean, I don't think I've ever done this, I hope. But just thinking about the Australian Psychological Code of Ethics and the stuff in there about the comparative language that you use.
Yes.
I'm a great coach. I am truly, and surely I can say I'm a great coach. I'm number one in the whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm sure you're a great coach. There's no question. However, you cannot say that you're better than any other coach because you don't know them all. You don't know what they do. And from the Australian Code of Ethics, that's a no-no, right? There are the idea of comparative selling denigrates other professionals. When you set yourself apart and say, I'm better, you are essentially diminishing the quality of your colleagues and peers. That's not nice.
And it's good to note, I think, that what we're talking about now, the Australian Code of Ethics, is actually this Australian Psychology Code of Ethics. And I don't recall when I was working in the book, it's hard to remember all the different codes that we touch on when you're doing this work, that there's that kind of information in coaching codes of ethics, perhaps in the British psychological coaching psychology space. I don't know. Maybe I should know, but I don't know. And
yeah, I may have overlooked it, but I have not read that in any other code of ethics. And so I applaud the APA, the Australian Psychology, APS, for including it, because it does hopefully corral our tendencies to do comparative selling.
I mean, it's quite interesting because I wonder how often we take notice of some of the points that are in the Code of Ethics and then relate them to our work. And I mean, this is maybe, it's not off topic, but it's off of the choose me, but it matters ultimately about how you show up, because this statement we're talking about was like shining lights blazing at me during the book of the work. And I went, wow, I'm looking at it like it's the first time I've ever seen it in my life. And maybe it has been that I really, really saw it. I don't know, but it made me wonder about, wow, where have I been? How is it that it's this light's blazing at me?
I appreciate you sending that to me, by the way, to add to the research. I think that we don't really take the codes of ethics seriously and use them. Right. We all know the basics, right? You don't have sex with your client, and don't reveal information to the client's boss and that kind of thing. But we have to really understand, what does it mean to think ethically, to make ethical judgments, and apply that situationally, case by case by case. I'm doing a research project now with on ethics and coaching and supervision with some colleagues, and we're interviewing and we're asking folks to tell us cases. And one case that I would have never thought of was about a consultancy owned by a coach who is interfering with the work that the contractor coaches are doing in order to please the sponsor, right? The owners wants to get more business from this business. And so pushing the contractor coach to work with the client in a particular way. Holy moly, how unethical is that? So when we think about codes of ethics, we need to understand, what are the core principles and values that underpin those codes? And how do they apply? And what am I bringing into this thinking process? What are my biases? What are my blind spots? What am I not seeing here? Some ethical dilemmas, an ethical dilemma is a situation where every choice has some cost, right? How do I weigh and evaluate those? Right? And I think this is also where we need to have other resources, supervisors, for example, who will help us think through those things. The codes are not explicit for the most part. I mean, in the Australian case, they are sometimes, but they don't necessarily prohibit or define every single possible situation that we're going to encounter in real life with messy people. right? Being human is a mess. And so how do we navigate the messiness in a way that is responsible?
Yeah. And so we go from the decision making to then having to take some form of action.
That's correct. And taking responsibility for it.
Yeah. And having a very good rationale for the choice you've made
Mm-hmm.
is often useful
Mm-hmm.
and should be mandatory. And,
Yes. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
then learning from the actions that you have taken and the outcomes.
That's right.
But that's not to say we can do it exactly the same next time.
No. Every situation is unique. And so we have to do that thinking over and over and over again. And then maybe, hopefully, we see some patterns, right, that provide guidance. But it is very much a path made by walking.
Mm-hmm. And yet, as I was working in the second book, the ethical case studies book, it come to my attention that there's a huge gap actually from that decision making to actually taking the action. And so I think there's more work to do about the action. I'm thinking about these people who do promote themselves in different ways. And I wonder, what are they thinking when they are then taking this action and making these promises? How does that sit with them when they're saying, I can help you increase your business by 90% or whatever crazy amount there's crazy amounts that some people are out there.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think I cite it in the book, Passmore and Joy. They write about our blind spots.
Mm-hmm.
What are they thinking? They're thinking, choose me, right? And I think that coach education, coach development is an ongoing journey, really needs to pay more attention in the field to this whole process, the journey of ethical decision-making and ethical choices. We can't just learn the codes and decide that's enough.
Mm-hmm.
Know the codes, right? So it's an ongoing developmental piece. And for those folks who haven't stopped to think about what am I saying, it's never too late. It's never too. Revisit your website and take a look at what words you've used, what promises you've made, and what are you setting up if a client did choose you.
I recall when we were editing the chapter, you mentioned about people promising things like joy, or even, there was a bit of a tug of war there with positive psychology, I recall, and coaching, etc. Only a little one, but but I think it's an important point, because a lot of people do promise a lot of things, and
Yeah.
I even say, that if you're coaching with me, that you'll definitely be challenged, but you'll definitely work to experience more moments of joy.
Well, but what you're promising is a process, not an outcome,
Mm.
right? And that's the difference. Now you're qualified, right? You're a qualified positive psychologist. Some of this language means different things in different frameworks. Right? My own background is adult learning and development. Transform means something very particular in adult learning. And it does not mean, oh, happy, wonderful, joyous. It means, it doesn't mean the light's going to shine out of my ears. It means something. It means your mental models are reconfigured, right? So when we use words like transform, like joy, we need to keep in mind a couple things. One is, what do I actually mean by that word? What am I offering or promising a result? Or am I promising a process based on qualifications and techniques that I use as a coach that are geared toward evoking a particular experience for you.
So I saw something the other day with someone, there's a retreat or something like that, it was a coaching or something, and they said, you know, to join their event of whatever it was for a transformative experience.
I'd be curious to know what they mean. You know, it's transform is one of those emotion directed words. I think, oh yeah, man, I am so unhappy with me. I would love to be transformed. Well, what is that what they're really promising? That I'm going to be a different me? You know? Or are they promising that I'm going to reconfigure my mental models so that I can navigate through my life with less stress? You know, or
Or
more
they promise
complexity.
that they, as the coach, are doing the transformation of the coachee.
Right, right. What are they promising? And I think that's the key. So the way we language our promotional materials matters a lot. It matters a lot.
Yeah, so we need more thinking around that. All
Yeah.
of us, even for our own websites and our own social media postings, etc. And I mean, it's curious to me, you know, when we're thinking about what we post of even other people's work, it's like, how are we posting that and shaping it up in line, in line with what someone else is saying, the person's work that we're sharing? Does it fit that, or are we making more of them? Different cultures use different languages to describe people. I've experienced this recently, and it's actually a little bit overwhelming. And I go, you know, that doesn't really fit me. I'm not that kind of person. But that culture, like, kind of talks about people in that way. And so you got to go with the flow. So it can be culturally specific as well, the language that you use. And you need to be mindful, I think, around that, and be just cognizant of it and kind of go with the flow sometimes, even if it doesn't quite fit.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
You know what, Francine, thank you so much for having this chat today.
Thank you for the opportunity. It's always fun to talk with you, Wendy-Ann, and you get the little gray cells going.
Yeah, we have a bit of a laugh too, which is always nice. And so, you know, look forward to seeing you and hearing your session at the conference at the end of the year. Thank you so much for choosing to join us. And we'll see, hopefully, you know, people will enjoy this initial chit chat and introduction into your brilliant chapter of Choose Me.
Thank you. I look forward to hearing the rest of these as well. So keep them coming.
We have a few coming. Thank you so much.
Right.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.